A small beggar saved a millionaire who was crossing the street without paying attention and gave. The screech of tires pierced the air as 12-year-old Jack watched the luxury car speeding toward the little girl. Time seemed to freeze as memories flooded his mind, his mother's tears when she was wrongfully fired from the hospital, their nights of hunger, and her deteriorating health. The girl in danger was Emily Edwards, daughter of the man who had destroyed their lives. 1 year ago, Edward Edwards had condemned Jack's mother without investigation, believing she was responsible for his wife's death. Now his daughter stood moments away from tragedy. Jack's feet felt heavy, his heart pounding with an impossible choice: let karma take its course, or save the child of the man who ruined everything. "No one deserves to lose a mother," Jack whispered, his own mother's gentle teachings echoing in his mind. Without further hesitation, he dropped his candy box and sprinted forward. The distance seemed endless, the car's engine roaring louder with each step. What happened next would change not just two families' lives, but challenge the very foundations of prejudice, justice, and redemption in ways none of them could have imagined. Before we start, share where you're watching from. If you're new or haven't subscribed, please click subscribe. It means the world to us. Thanks. Life had never been easy for Jack and his mother, Sarah Chen, but they faced each dawn with unwavering determination. Their small, weathered house on the outskirts of Los Angeles stood as a testament to their struggles, paint peeling from the walls, a leaking roof that turned music during rainstorms, and windows sealed with tape to keep the draft out. Yet within these humble walls lived two souls bound by an extraordinary love. Every morning, Jack would wake before sunrise, carefully trying not to disturb his mother, who often spent nights coughing. He'd organize his small box of candies, counting each piece meticulously. These weren't just sweets, they represented hope, medicine, and survival. At 12, Jack carried responsibilities far beyond his years. "Mom, I've made you some tea," he'd whisper, helping her sit up in bed. Sarah would smile, her face pale but her eyes bright with undimmed love. Despite her illness, she never lost her gentle demeanor or her ability to find joy in small moments with her son. "My brave little man," she'd say, her voice weak but warm. "You shouldn't have to do all this." But they both knew he had to. Since her wrongful dismissal from Angela's Memorial Hospital 2 years ago, their lives had become a daily battle for survival. Sarah had been one of the hospital's most respected nurses, known for her exceptional care and attention to detail. 15 years of dedicated service, countless lives saved, and a spotless record all erased in one tragic night. The irony wasn't lost on them. She, who had spent her life healing others, now couldn't afford her own treatment. The medication she needed grew more expensive each month, and their savings had long since dried up. Yet Sarah's greatest pain wasn't her illness, it was watching her son sacrifice his childhood. "Jack," she often said during their quiet evening moments, "promise me you'll keep studying." She'd reach for his school notebooks, carefully preserved despite their worn edges. "Education is the one thing they can never take away from you." Jack would nod, though they both knew his grades had been slipping. How could they not, when he spent his afternoons at traffic lights instead of doing homework? Still, he tried his best to read during quiet moments between cars, often tucking a borrowed library book into his candy box. Their neighbors knew their story, and many helped in small ways. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door would sometimes bring over extra food, and Mr. Chen, no relation from the corner store, would occasionally slip extra items into their grocery bag. But pride kept Sarah from accepting too much help. "We still have our dignity," she'd remind Jack, even on days when dignity felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. What few knew was that Sarah harbored a deeper pain. Every night after Jack fell asleep, she would take out a worn hospital badge and stare at it, tears silently falling. The badge reminded her not just of her lost career, but of the patient she couldn't save, Mrs. Edwards, wife of the hospital's owner. The investigation had been swift and merciless, concluding that Nurse Chen had administered the wrong medication. Sarah knew the truth was different, but against the power of the Edwards family, her voice had been silenced. Yet even in their darkest moments, Sarah never let bitterness take root in her heart. "Hatred only poisons the one who carries it," she would tell Jack when he expressed anger at their situation. Instead, she taught him compassion, resilience, and the importance of maintaining one's integrity even when the world seemed unfair. Each night, as Jack lay on his thin mattress beside his mother's bed, he would listen to her breathing and make silent promises. Promises to find a way to afford better treatment, to restore her reputation, to give her the life she deserved. He was too young to understand the full complexity of their situation, but old enough to know that their future hung by a thread as delicate as his mother's increasingly fragile health. Little did Jack know that fate was about to present him with a chance to change everything through a split-second decision that would test every value his mother had instilled in him, and force him to choose between justice and mercy in ways no child should ever have to face. From the outside, the Edwards mansion was the epitome of success, a sprawling estate perched high in the Beverly Hills, with manicured gardens, marble fountains, and a security system that cost more than most people's homes. But within its pristine walls, Edward Edwards, one of Los Angeles's most powerful healthcare moguls, lived in a prison of his own making. 2 years had passed since the night he lost his wife, Catherine. Yet her absence echoed through every corner of the mansion. Her photographs still adorned the walls, her garden remained meticulously maintained, and her piano sat untouched, gathering dust beneath its expensive cover. Edward had preserved everything exactly as she'd left it, as if keeping her world intact might somehow bring her back. Daddy 8-year-old Emily's voice would often break through his work-induced trance. "Can we have dinner together tonight?" Edward would glance up from his laptop, catching a glimpse of Catherine in their daughter's features, the same gentle eyes, the same hopeful smile. The resemblance was both a comfort and a torture. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. These hospital acquisitions are crucial. Maybe tomorrow." The words had become a script, repeated so often they'd lost meaning. Emily would nod, used to disappointment, while Nanny Maria gently led her away. The truth was, Edward couldn't bear to spend too much time with Emily. Every moment with her reminded him of Catherine, of the family dinners they'd shared, of the life they'd planned together. It was easier to bury himself in work, to focus on expanding his healthcare empire. Under his leadership, Angela's Memorial had grown into a network of hospitals, but success felt hollow without Catherine to share it. The night of Catherine's death played on endless loop in his mind. A routine procedure gone wrong, a nurse's fatal mistake, a family shattered beyond repair. The investigation had been swift. Nurse Sarah Chen had administered the wrong medication. Edward had made sure she'd never work in healthcare again. It was the only justice he could find in a world that no longer made sense. Emily, meanwhile, grew up in a gilded cage. Her days were filled with private tutors, music lessons, and carefully scheduled playdates with children from appropriate families. She had everything money could buy except what she truly needed: a father's presence, a mother's love. Mr. Edwards, Maria would report, Emily asked about her mother again today. Edward would dismiss these reports with a wave of his hand, unable to face his daughter's grief when he could barely handle his own. The vast mansion became a maze of avoided conversations and unspoken pain. The staff watched the father-daughter dynamic with quiet concern. Emily would spend hours in her mother's garden, talking to the flowers as if they were friends. She'd sit at the grand dining table alone, setting an extra place for her father who rarely came. Her birthday parties were lavish affairs attended by children she barely knew, while Edward made brief appearances between meetings. "Your father loves you very much," Maria would assure Emily during their nightly routine. "He's just busy." But Emily was old enough to see through the excuses. She'd learned to read the sadness in her father's eyes, to understand why he couldn't look at her for too long. At 8, she'd become an expert at being invisible in her own home. The turning point came during a board meeting when Edward overheard two directors discussing his daughter. "Poor child," one whispered, "growing up just like her father, all money, no heart." The words struck him like a physical blow. That night, for the first time in months, he went to Emily's room. She was already asleep, clutching a photograph of Catherine. Tears stained her small face. Edward sat beside her bed, reality finally breaking through his armor of grief and work. He'd lost his wife, yes, but he was losing his daughter too, not to death, but to his own neglect. The realization shook him, but old habits die hard. By morning, he was back behind his desk, promising himself he'd make changes. Someday. What Edward didn't realize was that someday was approaching faster than he imagined, brought about by an unlikely encounter that would force him to confront not just his role as a father, but his understanding of justice, redemption, and the true cost of his blind pursuit of vengeance. The events of that fateful night at Angela's Memorial Hospital remained etched in everyone's memory, though each person carried a different version of the truth. It was supposed to be a routine procedure, Catherine Edwards, admitted for minor complications following a charity event. No one expected it to become the catalyst for a tragedy that would ripple through countless lives. Sarah Chen had been on duty, working her usual night shift in the VIP wing. Her reputation preceded her 15 years of impeccable service, a mentor to new nurses, and known for her extraordinary attention to detail. That night she was training a new nurse, Amanda Wells, daughter of one of the hospital board members. Mrs. Edwards needs her 8 p.m. medication. Sarah had instructed Amanda, demonstrating the proper protocol for checking dosages. Always triple-check everything, especially with high-profile patients. What happened next became a matter of disputed record. According to the official investigation, Nurse Chen administered the wrong medication, leading to Catherine's fatal allergic reaction. But the security footage from that crucial moment was mysteriously corrupted, showing only static during the critical 5 minutes. "I didn't give her that medication," Sarah had protested during the investigation. "I was with another patient when it happened." Amanda was, but her voice trailed off, unwilling to accuse the young nurse without concrete proof. The hospital board, led by a grief-stricken Edward, demanded swift action. Amanda Wells, tearful and confused, provided testimony that sealed Sarah's fate. "I saw Nurse Chen enter Mrs. Edwards' room at 8:05 p.m. But only one person knew the complete truth: Eleanor Richards, the head nurse who had worked at Angela's Memorial for 3 decades. She had seen Amanda rushing from Catherine's room that night, looking panicked. But Eleanor, close to retirement and afraid of the powerful Wells family, had chosen silence. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Eleanor had whispered, watching her colleague clean out her locker. Sometimes survival means keeping quiet. The words would haunt her for years to come. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Sarah Chen was fired, her nursing license revoked. Edward Edwards, consumed by grief and rage, made sure she would never work in healthcare again. His influence reached far beyond Angela's Memorial. Every hospital in the region received word not to hire Sarah Chen. "She killed my wife," Edward had declared during the board meeting. "She doesn't deserve to practice medicine anywhere." The media painted Sarah as negligent, her years of dedicated service forgotten in the face of one alleged mistake. Only a few staff members dared to question the narrative, and they quickly found themselves reassigned to less desirable positions. Amanda Wells was promoted to head nurse of the VIP wing shortly after, her father beaming with pride during the announcement. Eleanor Richards retired 3 months later, carrying her guilty knowledge into a quiet retirement. But the truth had a way of leaving traces. In the hospital records room, buried among thousands of files, lay a crucial piece of evidence: the original medication log showing Amanda's signature, not Sarah's, on Catherine's chart. The document had been replaced with a modified version during the investigation, the original forgotten in the chaos. The incident changed the hospital's culture. Angelus Memorial became known for its rigid protocols and unforgiving standards. Edward Edwards transformed from a caring hospital administrator into a ruthless healthcare tycoon, as if building his empire could fill the void Catherine's death had left. For Sarah Chen, the consequences extended far beyond professional ruin. Unable to find work in her field, her health insurance lapsed. The stress and poverty gradually took their toll, manifesting in the illness that now threatened her life, an illness that proper medical care could have prevented. Young Jack, only 10 at the time, had watched his mother's descent from respected nurse to struggling street vendor. He'd overheard her crying at night, praying not for justice, but for strength to protect him from the harsh realities of their new life. Truth will prevail, Sarah would say when Jack asked why they didn't fight harder. But revenge only breeds more pain. We must keep our dignity. 2 years had passed since that night, but its shadow loomed large over both families. Edward and Emily lived in their fortress of wealth, imprisoned by grief and guilt. Sarah and Jack struggled in poverty, sustained only by their love and integrity. None of them realized that fate was about to bring their worlds crashing together again through a moment that would test their beliefs about justice, forgiveness, and the true meaning of healing. The morning dawned hot and unforgiving over Los Angeles, the sun beating down mercilessly on Jack's shoulders as he worked his usual spot near the luxury shopping district. His candy box felt heavier than usual, perhaps weighted by the knowledge that his mother's medication would run out in 3 days. Candy. Only $1, his voice carried across the busy intersection, competing with the hum of expensive cars and the chatter of privileged shoppers. Most ignored him, some gave pitying glances, while others clutched their designer bags closer as they passed. It was then that he spotted the sleek black Mercedes pulling up to the curb. The back window rolled down, revealing a familiar face he'd seen in newspaper photographs: Emily Edwards, daughter of the man who had destroyed his family's life. She was stepping out of the car, her nanny distracted by a phone call. Jack's heart clenched. 2 years of suppressed anger bubbled to the surface. This was the family that had branded his mother a killer, that lived in luxury while they struggled for survival. His fingers tightened around his candy box as he watched Emily wander toward a street performer. "Miss Emily, please stay close," the nanny called out, still arguing on her phone. But Emily, enchanted by the performer's music, kept moving. Jack saw it before anyone else: the delivery truck speeding around the corner, its driver texting, completely unaware of the little girl stepping off the curb. Time seemed to slow. In that split second, 1,000 thoughts raced through Jack's mind. His mother's tears as she packed up her nursing uniforms. The night she went hungry so he could eat. The humiliation of being called a killer's son at his old school. One step away from death, Emily looked just like any other 8-year-old girl. Not the daughter of a powerful man, not the heir to a healthcare empire, but a child who still had a chance to know her remaining parents' love. "What would you do?" Mummy whispered. His mother's voice echoed in his memory: "Our choices define us, not our circumstances." The candy box clattered to the ground. Jack's feet moved before his mind could fully process the decision. He lunged forward, arms outstretched, everything else blurring except for the small figure in the truck's path. The impact was hard as he grabbed Emily, using his momentum to spin them both back onto the sidewalk. They tumbled together, Jack making sure to take the brunt of the fall. The truck's horn blared as it swerved past, leaving behind the screech of tires and gasps from onlookers. "Oh my God!" Emily, the nanny's scream, cut through the chaos. Jack sat up slowly, checking Emily for injuries. She stared at him with wide, shocked eyes, the same gentle eyes as his mother's, he noticed with a jolt. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his anger forgotten in the face of her vulnerability. Emily nodded, still trembling. You saved me. Why?" The question caught him off guard. Why indeed? The daughter of Edward Edwards, the man who had shown no mercy to his family. He could have simply watched, let fate take its course. The thought made him sick. Because it was right, he answered simply, his mother's teachings winning over any desire for revenge. The crowd was gathering now, phones recording the scene. The nanny had reached them, pulling Emily into a protective embrace while eyeing Jack suspiciously, a street kid, dirty and poor, too close to her precious charge. "Thank you," Emily whispered, reaching out to touch his hand before her nanny pulled her away. "What's your name?" "Jack. Jack Chen." The nanny's face paled at the name. Everyone at Angel's memorial knew the Chen story. She quickly pulled out her phone, no doubt calling Edward Edwards. Jack stood slowly, wincing at his scraped knees. His candy box lay scattered across the sidewalk, a day's potential earnings ruined. But as he watched Emily's small figure being hurried into the Mercedes, he knew he'd make the same choice again. "Your father's going to hear about this," he heard the nanny say to Emily, a Chen boy of all people. Jack picked up his empty box, knowing the story would reach Edward Edwards within minutes. He could already imagine the man's reaction to learning who had saved his precious daughter. Would it change anything? Would it make him question his judgment from 2 years ago? Either way, Jack realized something significant had just shifted. The walls between their worlds had cracked, and through that crack, truth might finally find its way to light. The black Mercedes screeched to a halt outside the shopping district within 15 minutes of the incident. Edward Edwards emerged, his imposing figure drawing immediate attention. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions, relief, gratitude, and confusion warring as his eyes found Jack still standing on the sidewalk. "You're Sarah Chen's son," Edwards stated, his voice carrying years of presumption and prejudice. It wasn't a question. Jack straightened his shoulders, meeting the man's gaze. "Yes, sir, I am." Edward pulled out his wallet, hands slightly trembling. "Name your price, boy, whatever you want for saving my daughter." The crowd watched, phones still recording, as Edward withdrew a thick stack of bills. This was his world. Everything had a price. Every problem could be solved with money. But Jack's next words would shake that foundation. "I don't want your money, Mr. Edwards." Jack's voice was quiet but firm. "But there is something you could do for me." Edward's eyebrows rose, suspicion crossing his features. Here it comes, he thought, blackmail perhaps, or some elaborate scheme for revenge. "Come with me," Jack continued. "There's someone you need to meet properly this time. Someone you judged without knowing the whole story." The whispers in the crowd grew louder. Emily, still clutching her nanny's hand, watched the exchange with growing interest. "Daddy," she interjected, "please listen to him. He saved my life." Edward hesitated, years of built-up prejudice warring with the undeniable debt he now owed this boy. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Lead the way." The walk to Jack's neighborhood was silent and tense. Every step took Edward further from his comfort zone, deeper into a world he'd deliberately ignored. Emily insisted on coming along, her small hands slipping into Jack's as they walked, much to her father's visible discomfort. As they approached the modest house, Edward's step faltered. The peeling paint, the patched roof, the small garden struggling to survive, it was a physical manifestation of what his actions had cost this family. Mum, Jack called out as they entered. "We have visitors." Sarah Chen was sitting up in bed, her nurse's instincts immediately assessing the unexpected guests. Her eyes widened as she recognized Edward Edwards, but there was no hatred in her gaze, only a quiet dignity that made Edward look away first. "Mr. Edwards," she said softly, "I've been expecting this day for 2 years." Emily stepped forward, drawn to the gentle presence that reminded her somehow of her own mother. "You're Jack's mum? He saved me today." Sarah smiled, reaching out to touch Emily's hand. "That sounds like my son, always helping others, just like she paused, meeting Edward's eyes, just like I tried to do at the hospital. The weight of unspoken words filled the room. Edward stood rigid, facing the woman he'd condemned without a fair hearing. He saw now what he'd refused to see before: her obvious medical knowledge, as she gestured for Emily to sit properly, her practiced way of checking Jack for injuries from the rescue, the family photos showing her in nursing scrubs receiving awards for excellence. "Why did you really bring me here?" Jack Edward asked, his voice hoarse. "Because she's dying, Mr. Edwards," Jack replied, his composure finally cracking. "The same healthcare system you control, the one that banned her from working, won't treat her without insurance. I sell candy every day, but it's not enough. I brought you here so you could see what your revenge really cost." Edward's world tilted on its axis. He'd spent 2 years building his empire higher, as if success could justify his actions. But here, in this humble room, facing the dignity of the woman he'd wronged and the son who'd saved his daughter, despite everything, his certainties began to crumble. "Sarah's next words would haunt him forever. I never gave Catherine that medication, Mr. Edwards. But proving my innocence wouldn't bring her back, so I chose to protect my son instead of fighting a battle I couldn't win." Emily, with a child's intuition for truth, moved to sit beside Sarah on the bed. "You remind me of my mom," she said simply. She was kind too. The room fell silent. Outside, the Los Angeles sun was setting, casting long shadows through the worn curtains. In that moment, Edward Edwards faced a choice: cling to his comfortable narrative of guilt and vengeance, or open himself to the possibility that he'd been catastrophically wrong. His decision would change not just 2 families' lives, but the very foundations of everything he'd built in the past 2 years. The news spread through Angeles Memorial Hospital like wildfire. Whispers in corridors, hushed conversations in break rooms, urgent text messages between staff members. "Did you hear? The Chen boy saved Emily Edwards." Eleanor Richards, the retired head nurse who'd kept silent about that fatal night, nearly dropped her morning coffee when her former colleagues called with the news. In her quiet suburban home, she felt the weight of her 2-year silence pressing down harder than ever. Meanwhile, at the Edwards mansion, the household staff watched the security footage from their phones, shaky videos uploaded by witnesses showing Jack's heroic rescue. Maria, the housekeeper who'd worked for the family since before Catherine's death, recognized something in the boy's actions that others missed. "He moves like his mother," she murmured to herself. "Quick, decisive, always putting others first. Just like Sarah did that night." The hospital board convened an emergency meeting, concerned about potential media coverage. Amanda Wells, now head nurse of the VIP wing, sat uncomfortably as they discussed damage control strategies. Her father, board member James Wells, was particularly vocal. "We need to get ahead of this story," he insisted. "Perhaps a generous settlement to the Chen family with a strict non-disclosure agreement." Back in Jack's neighborhood, word of his actions sparked different reactions. Mrs. Rodriguez brought over extra food, tears in her eyes as she hugged him. "Your mother raised a true hero," she said, "but not everyone was supportive." "You should have let karma take its course," said one neighbor bitterly. "The Edwards family deserves to know how it feels." At school the next day, Jack found himself the center of unwanted attention. Some students, children of Angeles Memorial staff, whispered behind his back. Others, from wealthy families, suddenly wanted to befriend the boy who'd saved Emily Edwards. "My dad says your mom killed someone," one kid taunted during lunch. "How does it feel to be a killer's son who saved a life?" Emily, attending her private school across town, faced her own challenges. Her classmates bombarded her with questions about the poor boy who'd saved her. Some parents called the school, concerned about Emily's new association with that family. But Emily remained steadfast. During art class, she drew a picture of her rescue, carefully coloring Jack's figure with the same attention she gave to drawings of her mother. Her teacher noticed she'd drawn halos around both Jack and his mother. "Edward, meanwhile, struggled to process the events. In his office, he obsessively reviewed Sarah Chen's personnel file, looking for something he might have missed. The exemplary performance reviews, the letters of recommendation, the patient testimonials, how had he ignored all this evidence before? His secretary interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, the press is requesting statements about yesterday's incident. And there's something else. The hospital's legal team found some inconsistencies in the original investigation files." Edward waved her away, his mind replaying Sarah's words. "I never gave Catherine that medication." For the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that he'd been wrong. That evening, Emily surprised her father by sitting at Catherine's piano, something she'd never done before. The simple melody she played was one Jack had hummed during their walk to his house. "Mom would have liked Jack," Emily said quietly. "He has kind eyes like she did." Edward stood frozen, hearing his daughter speak about her mother naturally for the first time since the tragedy. The walls he'd built around his grief began to crack. At Jack's house, similar changes were unfolding. Sarah's condition had improved slightly, perhaps from the excitement of the day. She sat up longer than usual, helping Jack with his homework, a glimpse of their life before everything changed. Mum, Jack asked hesitantly, "Do you think Mr. Edwards will help us now?" Sarah squeezed his hand. "Whatever happens, you've already done something extraordinary. You chose compassion over resentment. That's worth more than any help he could give." But beneath her calm exterior, Sarah worried. She'd seen the look in Edward's eyes, recognition warring with denial, guilt battling with pride. She knew from experience how dangerous powerful men could be when their worldview was threatened. Late that night, Edward sat in his study, a glass of untouched whiskey before him. On his desk lay 2 photographs: Catherine in her hospital bed, smiling despite her illness, and a security camera still of Sarah Chen working that fatal night, wearing the same dedicated expression his wife had praised just hours before her death. His phone buzzed with a message from James Wells. "Remember who your friends are, Edward. Some stories are better left buried." But as he looked at Emily sleeping peacefully in her bed, clutching the drawing she'd made of Jack's rescue, Edward knew things couldn't stay buried much longer. The truth, like a persistent seedling, had found a crack in the concrete of his certainty and was pushing its way toward the light. What no one realized was that this was just the beginning. The next few days would unravel a web of lies, test loyalties, and force everyone involved to confront the true meaning of justice, redemption, and family. If this story touched your heart and made you believe in the power of truth, forgiveness, and redemption, please consider subscribing to our channel. Every subscription helps us continue sharing these meaningful stories that remind us all of the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. Thank you for being part of our journey. Against all odds and social barriers, Emily and Jack's friendship blossomed in unexpected ways. Every afternoon, Emily would convince her driver to accidentally pass by Jack's candy-selling spot. Her pocket money, once spent on designer toys, now went to buying his entire inventory. "You don't have to buy everything," Jack would say, embarrassed. "But I want to," Emily would insist, her eyes sparkling with genuine care. "Besides, the other kids at school love when I bring candy." What started as simple candy transactions evolved into something deeper. Emily began sharing stories about her mother, memories she'd never felt safe expressing at home. Jack listened, understanding the weight of loss in a way her wealthy friends couldn't. "Sometimes I talk to her picture before bed," Emily confided one day. "Dad doesn't know. He puts away all her photos when I'm around, thinks it makes me sad, but not having her acknowledged hurts more." Jack shared his own stories too, about his mother's nursing days, her dedication to patience, the way she could calm any crying child with just a gentle touch. Emily soaked up these details, perhaps seeking to fill the maternal void in her life. However, their growing friendship didn't go unnoticed. At Emily's private school, parents began complaining. "It's inappropriate," one mother declared during a PTA meeting. "That boy is clearly using Emily to get to her father's money." The bullying started subtly. Emily's usual lunch companions would find excuses not to sit with her. Birthday party invitations stopped coming. Notes appeared in her locker charity case, "Lover and Poor People's Princess." But Emily, showing a strength that surprised everyone, stood her ground. During a particularly nasty incident in the cafeteria, she stood on a table and addressed her tormentors. "Jack saved my life when he could have let me die," she announced, her voice trembling but clear. "If that makes him beneath you, then I'd rather be beneath you too." At Jack's public school, the situation was equally challenging. The initial curiosity about his heroic act had turned into resentment. "Look who thinks he's special now," older boys would taunt. "Got yourself a rich little girlfriend here." One day, things escalated. A group of boys cornered Jack behind the school, led by the son of a nurse who'd lost her job in Edward's hospital reorganization. "My mum can't work because of your family," the boy spat, pushing Jack against the wall. "Now you're playing hero." What they didn't expect was Emily's timing. She'd started visiting Jack's school during lunch breaks and arrived just as the first punch was thrown. "Stop!" her scream drew immediate attention. Even at 8 years old, she carried her father's authoritative presence. "My father will hear about this." The threat of Edward's attention scattered the bullies, but the incident left its mark. That evening, as Jack applied ice to his bruises, Emily sat next to him on his worn porch steps. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's my fault they're targeting you." Jack shook his head. "No, it's not. People are just afraid of what they don't understand." From inside the house, Sarah watched them through the window. Despite her illness, she recognized something profound developing: two children healing each other's wounds, bridging a divide adults had created. Edward, too, noticed changes in his daughter. Emily was speaking more, smiling more. She'd started playing the piano again, something she'd refused to do since Catherine's death. When he asked about her day, she'd light up talking about Jack. "He's teaching me about constellations, Dad. Did you know his mum used to show him stars through a telescope they found at a yard sale?" Edward struggled with these developments. Part of him wanted to forbid the friendship, to protect the narrative he'd built around the Chen family, but he couldn't deny the positive changes in Emily. The situation reached a turning point when Emily asked an innocent question during dinner: "Dad, can Jack come over to study? His math textbook is really old, and we have that big library nobody uses." Edward's initial instinct was to refuse. Having Sarah Chen's son in his house seemed like crossing a line, but Emily's next words stopped him cold. "Mom would have said yes. She always told me to help others, remember?" The silence that followed was deafening. It was the first time Emily had used her mother's memory to challenge him directly. Looking at his daughter's determined face, so like Catherine's, Edward made a decision that would set in motion events none of them could have predicted. "Yes," he said finally. "Jack can come." The morning Sarah collapsed changed everything. Jack found her unconscious, her breathing shallow, the half-empty bottle of generic medication scattered across the floor. His hands trembled as he dialed 911, childhood training from watching his mother work giving way to raw panic. "Please, my mum's a nurse," was a nurse, he corrected himself to the dispatcher, voice cracking. "Her pulse is weak and she's not responding. Please hurry." The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. Sarah Chen, once the most respected nurse at Angelus Memorial, was now being rushed to the very hospital that had cast her out. The emergency room staff froze momentarily when they recognized her, memories of that fatal night 2 years ago surfacing. Dr. Marcus Rivera, who had worked alongside Sarah for a decade, took charge of her case. "Forget politics," he barked at his hesitating staff. "This is Sarah Chen, and we treat her like any other patient, no better." The diagnosis hit Jack like a physical blow. Her condition had deteriorated far beyond what they'd suspected. The cheap substitute medication she'd been forced to use had masked the severity of her illness while allowing it to progress unchecked. "She needs immediate intensive care," Dr. Rivera explained gently. "And specialized treatment, that's, well, it's expensive, Jack." The numbers he quoted made Jack's head spin. Even if he sold candy every minute of every day for a year, it wouldn't come close to covering the costs. "What about insurance?" he asked desperately, knowing the answer. "Your mother's been blacklisted from every major provider in the state," the hospital administrator explained, not meeting his eyes. Mr. Edwards' influence runs deep. Word of Sarah's hospitalization spread quickly through the hospital grapevine. Eleanor Richards, the retired head nurse, rushed in despite having avoided the hospital for 2 years. She found Jack sitting alone in the waiting room, looking smaller than his 12 years. "I should have spoken up," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Maybe none of this would have happened. But before she could explain further, Emily burst into the waiting room, still in her school uniform. She'd overheard her driver receiving the news and had demanded to be brought immediately. "Jack," she threw her arms around him. "I called Dad. He's in a board meeting, but he'll come. He has to help. He has to help." The hospital staff watched this scene unfold with mixed emotions. Here was the daughter of the man who had destroyed Sarah Chen's life, comforting her son with such genuine concern. It challenged everything they'd been led to believe about the situation. As the hours passed, Sarah's condition stabilized but remained critical. Dr. Rivera presented Jack with papers requiring a guardian's signature for further treatment. "I can forge Mum's signature," Jack offered desperately. "She taught me for emergencies." "That would be fraud, Jack," Dr. Rivera said kindly. "And your mother wouldn't want that." Emily, who hadn't left Jack's side, suddenly stood up. "Where are you going?" Jack asked. "To make my father understand," she replied with a determination beyond her years. "Mum died in this hospital. I won't let Jack's mum die here too." The hospital administrator tried to intervene when Emily marched toward the boardroom, but even at 8 years old, she carried the Edwards authority. She pushed open the heavy doors, interrupting her father mid-presentation. "Emily, what are you?" "Mrs. Chen is dying," she announced to the room of startled executives. The same Mrs. Chen who used to sing to scared children before their surgeries. The same Mrs. Chen who saved Jimmy Wells when he choked in the cafeteria. The same Mrs. Chen who... Her voice broke, but she continued, "The same Mrs. Chen who stayed late with Mom every night during her last week, reading her favorite books when you were too busy to visit." The boardroom fell silent. Edward stared at his daughter, seeing Catherine's fierce compassion blazing in her eyes. "If you let her die," Emily concluded, "you're not the daddy Mom fell in love with." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Board member Wells started to speak, but Edward raised a hand to silence him. For the first time in 2 years, he was seeing his actions through his late wife's eyes and, more importantly, through his daughter's. But before he could respond, Dr. Rivera burst into the room. "Mr. Edwards, sorry to interrupt, but Sarah Chen has taken a turn for the worse. We need a decision about treatment now." In that moment, Edward Edwards faced a choice that would define not just Sarah's fate, but his own humanity. The question was, could he set aside his pride and prejudice in time to save the woman he'd wrongly condemned? Edward Edwards stood in the hospital corridor, his world tilting on its axis. Through the ICU window, he watched Sarah Chen fighting for her life, machines beeping steadily around her. Jack sat beside her bed, his small hand clutching hers, while Emily pressed her face against the glass, tears streaming silently. The media had already gathered outside the hospital, hungry for the story healthcare mogul's nemesis fighting for life in his own hospital. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Mr. Edwards, Dr. Rivera approached, charts in hand. We need your decision about the experimental treatment. As board chairman, your approval can override the insurance issues. Before Edward could respond, James Wells appeared, pulling him aside. Think carefully, Edward. Helping her admits wrongdoing. The lawsuits would be endless. The board would revolt. She's dying, James. People die every day. That's business. Emily's voice cut through their conversation. That's what they said about Mom too, isn't it? Just business. The words struck Edward like physical blows. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw Catherine's compassion shining through her tears. But making his way to Sarah's room, Edward gestured for Jack to join him outside. The boy reluctantly left his mother's side, standing before the man who'd destroyed their lives, somehow still maintaining his dignity. "Why did you really save Emily?" Edward asked quietly. Jack's answer was simple: because Mom taught me that doing the right thing isn't about who deserves it, it's about who we choose to be. In that moment, Edward saw himself through Jack's eyes, not as the powerful healthcare mogul, but as a man who'd let grief twist him into someone his wife would hardly recognize. He turned to Dr. Rivera. Begin the treatment. Full coverage, best care available. And remove Sarah Chen from every blacklist, insurance, employment, everything. The relief in the room was palpable, but James Wells wasn't finished. He grabbed Edward's arm. The board won't stand for this. Think about your position, your reputation. Edward's response was ice cold, then call an emergency board meeting. Now. The next hour was chaos. Board members arrived, looking uncomfortable as they passed Sarah's room. The press outside grew larger. Social media exploded with conflicting narratives about the Chen-Edwards saga. In the boardroom, Edward stood at the head of the table, Emily surprisingly firm at his side. The board members shifted nervously as he began to speak. 2 years ago, we made a decision based on incomplete information and personal bias, Edward stated. Today we have a chance to correct that mistake. James Wells interjected, a mistake. We followed protocol. The investigation was clear. Was it Eleanor Richards' voice came from the doorway? The retired head nurse walked in, clutching a folder. I've carried this guilt for 2 years. Today I choose to speak. The room fell silent as Eleanor placed the folder on the table. These are the original medication logs from that night. Amanda Wells, not Sarah Chen, signed for Catherine's final medication. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. James Wells' face turned pale as Eleanor continued. I saw Amanda leave Catherine's room that night, looking terrified. I stayed quiet to protect my pension, my reputation. That silence nearly cost another life. The board erupted in chaos. James Wells shouted about loyalty and tradition. Others demanded immediate investigation. Through it all, Emily's small voice somehow carried Daddy. Mom always said hospitals were for healing people, not hurting them. Edward raised his hand for silence. I'm authorizing Sarah Chen's treatment. I'm also launching a full investigation into the events of that night. Any board member who opposes this can submit their resignation immediately. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. One by one, board members nodded their agreement. James Wells stormed out, taking out his phone, no doubt calling his lawyer. Outside Sarah's room, Jack had heard everything through the open door. His hands trembled as Edward approached him. Your mother will receive the best care possible, Edward said softly. And when she recovers, because she will recover her position at Angel's Memorial, will be waiting for her if she wants it. Jack looked up at the man who'd been his family's nemesis for 2 years. Why now? Edward glanced at Emily, who had taken her usual spot next to Jack. Because your mother raised a son who could save his enemy's daughter without hesitation. And I need to become the kind of father who deserves a daughter brave enough to fight for what's right. As doctors rushed to begin Sarah's treatment, the media outside crafted their headlines. and the hospital buzzed with the day's events, two children sat together in the waiting room, holding hands and hoping. "Jack," Emily whispered. "Do you think our mums would be friends if they met?" Jack smiled through his tears. "I think they already are somewhere." Edward, watching them from a distance, finally understood what Catherine had always tried to tell him: healing wasn't just about medicine and protocols. Sometimes it was about having the courage to admit you were wrong and the strength to make it right. But the decision he'd made today would change everything: his hospital, his reputation, his legacy. But looking at his daughter's peaceful face as she comforted her friend, Edward knew it was the first right decision he'd made in 2 years. 3 months after Edward's decision, Jack found himself standing at the gates of Westbrook Academy, the same prestigious private school Emily attended. His new uniform felt stiff and foreign, the leather book bag a gift from Edward, heavy with possibility. "Remember, you earned this," Sarah had told him that morning, looking healthier than she had in years. Her treatment was progressing well, though recovery would be a long journey. "The scholarship is based on your test scores, not charity." Indeed, Jack's entrance exam scores had broken school records. The same determination that had kept him selling candy and studying by streetlight had translated into academic excellence. Still, whispers followed him through Westbrook's hallowed halls. "That's him, the candy boy who saved Emily Edwards. I heard his mother tried to kill Emily's mom. Daddy says Mr. Edwards is just doing damage control." Emily waited for him by his assigned locker, her presence both a comfort and a lightning rod for more gossip. She'd appointed herself his unofficial guide, ignoring the social suicide this represented among her wealthy peers. "Don't worry about them," she said, noticing his tense shoulders. "They talked about me too after Mum died. Like tragedy was contagious." Their first class together was English literature, where the teacher, Mrs. Parker, was discussing themes of redemption in Great Expectations. The parallel wasn't lost on anyone when she called on Jack to analyze Pip's social transformation. "Being a gentleman isn't about wealth or status," Jack answered quietly. "It's about choosing to do right, even when it's hard. Pip learns that too late, but he learns." The class fell silent. Mrs. Parker smiled, recognizing wisdom beyond his years. "Excellent insight, Mr. Chen." But not everyone appreciated Jack's intelligence. During lunch, a group of boys led by Bradley Wells, Amanda Wells' younger brother, cornered him in the cafeteria. "You think you're special because you played hero," Bradley sneered. "My sister lost her job because of your family's drama." Jack stayed calm, remembering his mother's words about dignity. "Your sister has a new job at Cedar Sinai, and we both know why she really left Angela's memorial." Bradley's face reddened. He knew something about that night, Jack realized. Before things could escalate, an unexpected voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" It was Marcus Edwards, Emily's older cousin and the school's student body president. Known for his fair-mindedness, Marcus had been watching Jack since his arrival. "The Chen boy needs to learn his place," Bradley muttered. "His place?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You mean at the top of every class? Because that's where he is, Wells. Now back off." The intervention marked a turning point. Marcus's approval carried weight, and gradually Jack's academic achievements began overshadowing his background. Teachers praised his insights. Students started asking for help with homework. Even some parents, impressed by his perfect test scores, invited him to study groups. But Jack never forgot his roots. Every Friday he still visited his old neighborhood, sharing his new books with kids who dreamed of better schools. He tutored them using techniques he learned at Westbrook, creating a small bridge between two worlds. One evening, Edward found him in the school library long after hours, surrounded by medical textbooks. "Planning ahead?" Edward asked, noticing the advanced material. "Mom used to say knowledge saves lives," Jack replied. "I want to understand her world better." Edward sat down, something weighing on his mind. Your mother's case review is next week. The medical board will reinstate her license. I know. Jack closed his book. She's nervous. 2 years is a long time to be away from nursing. She shouldn't be, Edward said firmly. The best nurses never lose their instincts. I've arranged a position for her at Angela's Memorial, if she wants it. Head of training, teaching new nurses the importance of attention to detail. Jack studied the man who'd gone from enemy to unlikely ally. Why are you doing all this? Edward was quiet for a moment. Because your mother was right about that night, and Emily was right about who I'd become after Catherine died. Some debts can't be repaid with money. As if summoned by her name, Emily appeared around the bookshelf. Dad. Jack. Mom's piano recital recording, they found it. The annual charity recital had been Catherine's last public performance. The hospital had supposedly lost all recordings in a system upgrade. How? Edward asked, stunned. Mrs. Richards, the retired nurse? She kept a copy all this time. She's giving it to us tomorrow. The news hit both men differently, Edward remembering his wife's passion for music, Jack realizing how many people had carried pieces of the truth all along. That night, as Jack walked home through the now familiar wealthy neighborhood, he reflected on how much had changed. His new life was opening doors he'd never imagined, but success meant nothing without staying true to his mother's values. A text from Emily lit up his phone. Dad's listening to Mom's recording. He's crying but smiling. First time I've seen him do both. Thank you, Jack. He typed back for what? Her response was simple, for showing us how to be brave. Looking up at the stars, Jack whispered his own thanks to his mother for teaching him dignity, to Emily for teaching him friendship, and even to Edward for teaching him that redemption was possible. But tomorrow would bring new challenges. The medical board review wasn't the only truth about to surface, and not everyone wanted the past uncovered. The transformation of the Edwards mansion was subtle but significant. Where silence once reigned, music now floated through the halls, Emily practicing Catherine's songs on the piano, often with Sarah offering gentle guidance during her visits. The formerly unused kitchen filled with warmth as Sarah taught both children her famous chicken soup recipe, the same one she'd made for hospital staff during night shifts. Edward watched these changes from his study, emotions warring within him. His daughter was blossoming, finally having a maternal figure in her life. But each tender moment was a reminder of his grievous mistakes, of the 2 years he'd robbed them all of this healing. She has Catherine's touch on the keys, Sarah remarked one evening, after helping Emily master a particularly challenging piece. The same patience, the same grace. Edward gripped his desk, memories flooding back. Catherine always said music was medicine for the soul. She played for her patients, did you know? I remember Sarah smiled softly. The night shift was never the same without her impromptu concerts in the children's ward. The easy way Sarah spoke of Catherine struck something in Edward. Here was someone who had known his wife not as Mrs. Edwards, the hospital benefactor's spouse, but as Catherine, the woman who snuck extra pudding to sick kids and hummed while changing IV bags. Their conversation was interrupted by sounds of laughter from the garden. Jack was teaching Emily to build a telescope from household items, just as his mother had taught him. Their shadows danced on the lawn, 2 children bridging a divide adults had created. They're healing each other, Sarah observed, and perhaps healing us too. But not everyone welcomed these changes. Maria, the longtime housekeeper, struggled with Sarah's growing presence in the household. One morning, she confronted Edward in his study. Mr. Edwards, people are talking. The staff. They remember that night. Having Nurse Chen here, it's disrupting the natural order. Edward looked up sharply. What do you mean, they remember that night? Maria paled, realizing her mistake. Just. Rumors, sir? Hospital gossip. But Edward's investigative instincts, dulled by grief for 2 years, began stirring. "Tell me everything you've heard." Meanwhile, Emily was experiencing her own revelations. While helping Jack organize his mother's old nursing documents, she found a journal entry dated the night Catherine died. "Jack, look," she pointed to a hastily scribbled note. "Amanda insists on handling Mrs. Edwards' evening medication. Says her father's orders. Something feels wrong. Must check." The entry ended abruptly. Before they could process this discovery, Eleanor Richards arrived for her weekly piano lesson with Emily, a recent arrangement that raised eyebrows among the hospital's old guard. "Mrs. Richards," Emily asked innocently, "you were there that night, weren't you?" "With my mom." The retired nurse froze, her hands trembling on the piano keys. "Some truths are dangerous, dear, especially when powerful people want them buried." Jack recognized the fear in her eyes, the same fear he'd seen in hospital staff who'd whispered support to his mother but never publicly defended her. "My mom lost everything because people were afraid to speak up," he said quietly. "Is that what really happened?" Eleanor looked between the two children, seeing their determination. Finally, she reached into her bag and pulled out a worn envelope. "I've carried this for 2 years. Maybe it's time." She pressed it into Emily's hands. "But be careful who you trust with it." Inside was a security camera photo, time-stamped from the night Catherine died. It showed Amanda Wells entering the medication room, her father James Wells close behind. "There's more," Eleanor whispered. "So much more. But some people would do anything to keep it hidden." As if on cue, Sarah's voice called from downstairs. "Emily? Jack? Mr. Wells is here for the hospital board meeting." The children quickly hid the envelope, but Emily's face had lost its color. "Jack, if what Mrs. Richards is suggesting is true." "Then my mum was framed," he finished. "And your mum." They shared a look of horror, understanding for the first time the true weight of what they'd discovered. In the study, Edward was reaching similar conclusions through his conversation with Maria. Years of managing hospitals had taught him to read between lines, to spot patterns in seemingly unrelated details. So Maria hesitated. "There's something else." "The night Mrs. Edwards. That night I overheard Mr. Wells on the phone in the garden. He said something about ensuring our position in Chen won't be a problem anymore." Edward felt ice in his veins. James Wells, his most trusted advisor, the man who'd helped him destroy Sarah Chen's life. A knock at the study door made them all jump. James Wells stood there, his usual confident smile in place. "Edward, ready for the board meeting? We need to discuss this situation with the Chen family. Things are getting out of hand." Edward looked at his old friend, seeing him with new eyes. In the garden, Jack and Emily hurriedly concealed Eleanor's envelope. Upstairs, Sarah sorted through her old journals, pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. The mansion, once a monument to grief and isolation, had become ground zero for a truth that could shatter foundations of power at Angelus Memorial. The question was, were they all ready for what that truth would cost? As if sensing the tension, Catherine's piano began playing itself an old recording Emily had started, her mother's music filling the house with an eerie reminder of what had been lost and what still might be found. The Angelus Memorial Hospital board meeting that afternoon crackled with underlying tension. James Wells had called an emergency session to address the Chen situation, but Edward's mind was elsewhere, studying the faces around the table with new suspicion. "This rehabilitation of Sarah Chen has gone far enough," Wells began, standing at the head of the table. "Donations are down 15% since her reinstatement was announced. Major benefactors are threatening to withdraw support." "They're concerned about liability," another board member added. "If we admit we were wrong about Chen." "We weren't wrong," Wells cut in sharply. "My daughter confirmed." "Your daughter," Edward interrupted quietly, "who mysteriously transferred to Cedar-Sinai right after the incident." The room fell silent. Wells' face tightened. Careful, Edward. Grief can make people see conspiracies where none exist. Meanwhile, in the hospital's archive room, Jack and Emily had convinced Eleanor Richards to help them search old records. The retired nurse's hands shook as she unlocked filing cabinets. "The original medication logs should be here," she whispered. Unless someone removed them," Jack finished, remembering the envelope's damning contents. Emily, smaller and quicker, squeezed behind a cabinet. "Look, there's a box fallen behind here." The dusty box contained medical records from the night Catherine died, but as they began reading, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Eleanor hissed, shoving them behind a large filing cabinet just as Amanda Wells entered. Mrs. Richards' Amanda looked surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Just. Nostalgia," Eleanor managed. "Missing the old days." Amanda's eyes narrowed. The archives are restricted, especially files from that period. As this scene played out, Sarah Chen sat in her newly assigned office, reviewing training protocols. A knock at her door revealed Maria, Edward's housekeeper, clutching a manila envelope. Mrs. Chen. Maria glanced nervously over her shoulder. "There's something you need to see." Inside were photos from hospital security cameras showing James and Amanda Wells in the medication room before Catherine's death. More damning were printed emails discussing handling the Chen problem and securing the family's position. Sarah's hands trembled. "Where did you get these?" "I've been collecting evidence since that night," Maria admitted. "But I was afraid. Mr. Wells, he has ways of dealing with threats." Back in the boardroom, tension was escalating. Edward had just proposed a full independent investigation into Catherine's death. "This is absurd," Wells slammed his hand on the table. "You're letting that woman manipulate you, Edward. First her son saves Emily, now she's playing surrogate mother." "Don't." Edward's voice was deadly quiet. "Don't talk about them that way." "The press is already asking questions," another board member warned. "If this gets out." "Then let it," Edward stood. "Catherine deserves the truth. We all do." In the archives, Emily had discovered something that made her gasp. Behind the cabinet was a small digital recorder, dusty but intact. The label read KE, Final Night. Jack pressed play, and Catherine's voice filled their hiding space. "Sarah, please make sure Amanda doesn't. Something's wrong." "The medication." The recording cut off abruptly. Emily's eyes filled with tears at hearing her mother's voice, but Jack's attention was on the footsteps approaching their hiding spot. Amanda Wells' voice grew closer. "I know someone's back there. Come out now." Eleanor stepped forward. "Amanda, enough. I was there that night. I saw." "You saw nothing." Amanda's voice shook. "Dad said this was for the best. The Chen woman was too close to discovering. She had to be stopped." Jack held Emily close as they listened, both understanding they were witnessing a confession. Emily's phone, forgotten in her pocket, was still recording. Meanwhile, Sarah was rushing to the boardroom with Maria's evidence when she quite literally ran into James Wells in the corridor. "Going somewhere?" Nurse Chen, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "You know, I've always admired your persistence, but sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie." Sarah stood her ground, like you did with Catherine Edwards. Wells' facade cracked. "You have no idea what's at stake. The hospital, the foundations, the power. Catherine was going to ruin everything with her ethical concerns about our research programs. And you were getting too close to the truth." Neither had noticed Edward standing in the hallway, recording every word on his phone. The situation exploded simultaneously in multiple locations. In the archives, Amanda's confession was interrupted by security arriving to investigate the disturbance. In the corridor, Wells realized too late that Edward had heard everything. In the boardroom, Remaining members received urgent messages about irregularities discovered in old research files. But Emily and Jack emerged from hiding, clutching the recorder and files. Sarah faced down Wells with newfound strength, while Edward finally saw the full scope of corruption that had cost his wife her life. The hospital erupted into chaos. Staff who had kept quiet for years began speaking up. Security cameras captured Wells attempting to delete files from the hospital's database. Amanda, confronted with her role in the tragedy, broke down and offered to testify. By sunset, reporters had gathered outside Angela's memorial, sensing a major story breaking. Inside, two families once torn apart by lies found themselves united by the search for truth. But as night fell, Jack noticed his mother looking troubled despite their vindication. "Mom, what's wrong? We found the truth?" Sarah touched his cheek gently. "Sometimes, sweetheart, the truth is just the beginning. The real test is what people choose to do with it." She was right. The next 24 hours would shake Angela's memorial to its foundations and test every bond these families had formed. The morning headlines hit like thunderbolts across Los Angeles. Angela's memorial scandal: death of hospital owner's wife, linked to research cover-up. Wells family implicated in frame-up of nurse Chen. Catherine Edwards' last recording reveals disturbing truth. Edward sat in his study, surrounded by evidence that had emerged in the past 24 hours. Catherine's voice from the recovered recording played softly in the background. "Sarah, I need you to look into the trial data. These results can't be right. Amanda keeps insisting. James Wells is pushing experimental treatments without proper protocols. Something's wrong with the medication there." The recording ended there, but its implications were devastating. Catherine had discovered irregularities in the Wells Foundation's research programs: experimental treatments fast-tracked for profit, data manipulated to secure funding, vulnerable patients exploited. Sarah Chen had been investigating the same concerns. That's why she had to be silenced. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Emily stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, clutching the old photo of her mother. "Dad, is it true? Did Mr. Wells really?" Edward opened his arms, and Emily ran into them. "Yes, sweetheart, your mother was trying to protect people, just like Mrs. Chen tried to do." "That's why they hurt her? Because she was good?" The innocent question struck Edward's heart. How could he explain to his daughter that her mother died because of corporate greed and his own blind trust in the wrong people? Across town, at Angela's memorial, Sarah Chen stood in her old nursing station for the first time since that fatal night. Eleanor Richards had brought her the complete files, years of documentation, showing how the Wells Foundation had manipulated drug trials, covered up adverse reactions, and silenced whistleblowers. Catherine discovered their scheme, Eleanor explained, her voice trembling. She was going to expose everything. Then James Wells ordered Amanda to switch her medication, knowing they could blame you during the chaos. Sarah touched the worn nursing station counter. Catherine suspected something that night. She asked me to double-check Amanda's work, but before I could. Mrs. Chen. They turned to find Amanda Wells in the doorway, looking pale and haunted. "I need to make a formal statement," Amanda said quietly, "about everything. Dad said it was for the greater good, that one nurse's career was nothing compared to the Foundation's work. But I hear Mrs. Edwards' voice every night in my dreams." As Amanda began her confession to the hospital's ethics committee, more staff came forward. Nurses who'd seen James Wells pressuring doctors to enroll vulnerable patients in trials. Administrators who'd been forced to alter data. Security guards who'd witnessed late-night document shredding. The evidence mounted hour by hour. In the hospital cafeteria, Jack sat with Emily, watching the chaos unfold on the news. Their innocent friendship had unknowingly set this revelation in motion. "I keep thinking," Emily said softly, "if you hadn't saved me that day." The truth would have stayed buried, Jack finished. Like Mom, Emily whispered. Jack took her hand. Not anymore. Now everyone will know who she really was, a hero who tried to stop bad people. Their moment was interrupted by commotion in the hallway. James Wells was being escorted out by hospital security, his face ashen. He stopped when he saw the children. "You," he snarled at Jack. "You ruined everything." Emily stood up, her small frame straight and proud. "No, Mr. Wells, you ruined everything when you hurt my mom. Jack and Mrs. Chen, they helped fix it." Wells laughed bitterly. "Fix it? You have no idea what this will do? The Foundation's research, the hospital's reputation, thousands of jobs." "What about the patients?" Jack asked quietly. "The ones you hurt with your fake trials." Before Wells could respond, Edward appeared with hospital security and 2 FDA agents. "James Wells, you're needed in the conference room. The federal investigators have some questions about the Foundation's research programs." As Wells was led away, Edward knelt before the children. "You two, your friendship, it broke down walls we adults built with our pride and prejudice. Catherine would be so proud." Emily touched the locket containing her mother's picture. "Dad? Can we do something? To make sure everyone remembers what Mom and Mrs. Chen tried to do?" Edward looked at his daughter, seeing Catherine's compassion shining through. "Actually," he said, "I have an idea." Later that afternoon, Edward called a press conference in the hospital lobby. With Sarah Chen on one side and Emily and Jack on the other, he faced the cameras. 25 years ago, Angela's Memorial was founded with a mission to heal and protect. Today we discovered how far we've strayed from that mission. My wife, Catherine Edwards, gave her life trying to expose corruption. Sarah Chen lost her career trying to protect patients. Today, we honor their courage by announcing the Catherine Edwards Chen Center for Medical Ethics. As Edward spoke, Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks. Not tears of sorrow or vindication, but of hope. Catherine's truth was finally known. Her own name was cleared, but more importantly, real change was coming. The press conference ended, but this was just the beginning. The full scope of the Wells Foundation's corruption was still emerging. More whistleblowers were coming forward. The hospital's reputation would take years to rebuild. But watching Jack and Emily hugging their parents, witnessing truth triumph over power, something profound had shifted in the hospital's very foundations. That evening, as families across Los Angeles watched the news unfold, a piano melody drifted through the hospital corridors, Emily playing her mother's favorite song, while Jack and Sarah listened, and Edward finally allowed himself to cry. The truth had emerged, but its ripples would transform far more than just two families' lives. The scandal exploded across media platforms with unprecedented force. Angela's Memorial, truth and justice for Catherine trended nationwide. News vans clogged the hospital parking lot. Every hour brought new revelations. Breaking FDA launches criminal investigation into Wells Foundation drug trials. Dozens of patients come forward, we were human guinea pigs. Whistleblower nurse Sarah Chen's story from pariah to hero. The hospital became a battlefield of competing narratives. Wells family lawyers held aggressive press conferences, claiming witch hunts and conspiracy theories. Patient advocacy groups demanded justice. Medical ethics experts dissected every detail on cable news. Inside Angela's Memorial, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Staff divided into camps, those supporting the investigation and those fearing its consequences. Careers built on Wells Foundation grants hung in the balance. Dr. Marcus Rivera, reviewing years of questionable trial data, confronted his own complicity. "I should have questioned these results," he admitted to Sarah. "The recovery rates were too perfect. We all knew, but the funding." In the hospital cafeteria, a young resident approached Jack and Emily, who had become unofficial symbols of truth's triumph. "My sister was in one of those trials," she said quietly. "She died last year. They said it was expected complications, but now—" Emily hugged her impulsively. "My mom would have fought for your sister," she declared. "That's why they had to stop her." The resident's story wasn't unique. As investigations deepened, more families came forward. The Wells Foundation had specifically targeted desperate patients, promising miracle cures while knowingly administering untested compounds. Amanda Wells, cracking under pressure, revealed more during her official testimony. "Dad said the ends justified the means. Think of the breakthroughs," he'd say. "A few sacrifices for the greater good." When Catherine Edwards started asking questions, he said she was threatening thousands of jobs, billions in research. The night she died. Her voice broke. "He handed me the wrong medication himself. Said one death to protect our work was simple mathematics. I didn't know. I never thought." The testimony leaked online within hours. Public outrage reached fever pitch. Protesters surrounded Wells' mansion. Former patients staged sit-ins at hospital board members' offices. Medical boards across the country began reviewing every Wells Foundation study. Edward, watching the chaos unfold, received an unexpected call from his biggest hospital investor. "Pull the plug, Edwards. Distance yourself. Blame Wells entirely. Save what you can." But Edward, sitting in Catherine's garden with Emily's piano music drifting through the windows, made a different choice. "No," he replied. "We expose everything. Every trial, every cover-up, every compromised official. Catherine died for this truth. I won't bury it again." The decision cost him millions as investors fled, but earned him something more valuable: his daughter's respect. Meanwhile, Sarah faced her own media storm. Journalists camped outside their modest home, seeking interviews. Medical ethics professors requested speaking engagements. A publisher offered a book deal. "They're calling you a hero," Mom Jack said, reading online comments. Sarah shook her head. "Catherine was the hero. I just tried to do my job." But the public disagreed. Sarah Chen became a symbol of moral courage against corporate corruption. Her story, the dedicated nurse, wrongly accused, who maintained her integrity through years of poverty, captivated people. The hospital staff's attitude shifted dramatically. Those who'd shunned her now sought forgiveness. Others revealed how they'd secretly helped during her years of exile: extra groceries left anonymously, job tips passed through friends, small kindnesses in dark times. Yet the scandal's human cost was devastating. Families learned loved ones had died in sham trials. Doctors realized their research was built on falsified data. Careers and reputations crumbled daily. Eleanor Richards, watching the hospital she'd served for 30 years tear itself apart, confided to Sarah. Was this worth it? All this pain, all these ruined lives? Sarah considered the question as she watched Jack and Emily helping younger patients understand the news about their treatments. Truth is like surgery, she replied. Sometimes healing requires cutting deep, removing the poison. It hurts, but the alternative is worse. The media circus peaked when investigative reporters discovered James Wells had fled the country. His departure sparked fresh outrage and new hashtags: Wells running and Catch James Wells. Amanda Wells, abandoned by her father, broke completely. During a live television interview, she revealed the full extent of the Foundation's crimes: decades of falsified trials, bribes to regulators, threatened whistleblowers. Social media exploded. Angela's Memorial's phone lines crashed from call volume. The hospital board, facing mounting pressure, announced an emergency session. Edward, preparing to face them, found Emily in Catherine's study. "Dad? Will they close the hospital?" Maybe he admitted. "But we'll build something better. Something honest, like Mom wanted." Emily hugged him. Then it's worth it. Jack and Sarah, invited to attend the board meeting, sat quietly as Edward addressed the packed room. Angelus Memorial was built to heal, not harm. We lost that mission somewhere between profit margins and power plays. My wife died trying to remind us of our purpose. Sarah Chen suffered for defending it. Today we choose continue the cover-up or rebuild with truth as our foundation. The vote was unanimous. Angelus Memorial would submit to a complete independent investigation, cooperate fully with authorities, and establish a victim compensation fund. Outside, protesters cheered the decision. Inside, staff members began the painful process of reviewing years of compromised care. That evening, as media crews finally packed up their equipment, Jack found Emily at her mother's piano. "Your dad did the right thing," he said, "even though it cost him everything." Emily smiled sadly. "Not everything. He got his conscience back. And Mom got her justice." The piano notes drifted through the hospital corridors, a requiem for what was lost and a prelude to what might yet be rebuilt. But the scandal's biggest revelations and its most personal costs were still to come. The Catherine Edwards Memorial Chapel at Angelus Memorial became the unlikely setting for the most dramatic confrontation of the scandal. As evening shadows lengthened across stained glass windows, three families converged: the Edwards, the Chens, and unexpectedly, the Wells. Amanda Wells had requested this meeting, away from cameras and reporters. She arrived looking haunted, clutching a worn leather journal. It was Catherine's, she explained, hands trembling. "I took it that night, after." Edward's face went pale. Emily gripped Jack's hand tightly. "Read it," Amanda whispered, sliding the journal across the chapel bench. "Please," she wrote everything. Edward opened the journal with shaking hands, recognizing his wife's elegant handwriting. As he read aloud, Catherine's voice seemed to fill the sacred space. April 15th, something's wrong with the trial data. Children's cancer ward numbers don't match observed results. Sarah noticed discrepancies too. James Wells dismissed our concerns, but his daughter looked terrified. What aren't they telling us? Sarah closed her eyes, memories flooding back. She'd noticed those same discrepancies. Edward continued reading. April 20th confronted James today. He talked about necessary sacrifices and greater good when I threatened to go to the ethics board. He reminded me how many jobs depend on foundation funding. Said Edward's position could be complicated if I pursued this, using my husband to silence me. The last entry, dated the day she died, was incomplete. Sarah was right. Amanda's hiding something. The medication logs don't match. I'm calling the FDA tonight after. The journal fell from Edward's hands. "She never got to make that call," Amanda said quietly. "Dad made sure of that." Emily stepped forward, facing her mother's killer for the first time with full understanding. Why? She was trying to help people. Amanda collapsed onto the chapel bench. Dad said one death would save the foundation. Said Catherine was being naive, that real progress requires sacrifice. He made me switch the medications, said if I didn't, he'd make sure Sarah Chen took the fall anyway. I was a coward. Sarah, who had lost everything because of this woman's cowardice, spoke with unexpected gentleness. Fear makes prisoners of us all, Amanda, but it's never too late to choose differently. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Amanda sobbed. I've lived with this guilt every day. Seeing Emily grow up without her mother, watching your family suffer. I tried to tell the truth so many times, but Dad had ways of keeping people quiet. Edward finished, remembering similar threats. Jack, who had been silent, suddenly asked, "Did you know my mom would be blamed? Did you know what it would do to us?" The question hung in the chapel air like a prayer awaiting answer. Amanda met his eyes. Yes. Dad said no one would believe a foreign-born nurse over his word. said her career was acceptable collateral damage. I watched you selling candy on street corners, knowing. She couldn't finish. Emily, in a moment of grace beyond her years, took Amanda's hand. Mom wouldn't want us to hate you, she said softly. She believed in healing, not hurting. Edward stood, Catherine's journal pressed to his heart. My wife died trying to protect patients. Sarah lost everything defending the truth. I was too blind with grief to see what was happening in my own hospital. We all failed Catherine in different ways. No, Sarah interjected firmly. Catherine didn't fail. She chose truth over safety, patience over profit. We honor her by making the same choice now. Amanda straightened, wiping her tears. I'll testify. About everything. Dad's offshore accounts, the falsified trials, the threatened whistleblowers. Catherine deserves that much. As if in response, the chapel's evening light shifted, casting rainbow patterns across Catherine's memorial plaque. Edward approached Amanda. You took my wife from us, his voice broke. But you've given Emily back her mother's truth. I have to believe Catherine would want us to heal from this, not destroy more lives seeking vengeance. Sarah added quietly, redemption begins with truth, however late it comes. Jack, watching this exchange, understood something profound about the adults around him, how pain and fear could twist good people, how truth could set them free, how forgiveness didn't mean forgetting but choosing to move forward. Emily walked to her mother's plaque, touching it gently. Mom, we found your voice. We heard you. The chapel fell silent except for soft sobs, Amanda's guilt, Edward's grief, Sarah's relief, all mingling in the sacred space. Later, as they left the chapel, Edward turned to Sarah. Catherine would be proud of how you've taught our children about dignity and forgiveness. I'm so sorry I ever doubted you. Sarah smiled sadly. We all did what we thought was right at the time. Now we do better. The evening news would announce Amanda Wells' decision to turn state's evidence. The hospital would begin its long journey toward redemption. Families would start healing. But in that chapel moment, something more personal had transformed. 4 people bound by tragedy had chosen truth over comfort, healing over hatred. Catherine's journal would become evidence in the legal proceedings, but its real power was in the hearts it had changed. As they walked out together, Edward supporting a shaken Amanda, Sarah holding both children's hands, the chapel light caught Catherine's plaque one last time. Truth heals what silence breaks. They had all finally heard her message. If this story touched your heart and made you believe in the power of truth, forgiveness and redemption, please consider subscribing to our channel. Every subscription helps us continue sharing these meaningful stories that remind us all of the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. Thank you for being part of our journey. Despite the vindication and public support, Sarah Chen's health took an unexpected turn. The stress of the investigation, media attention, and emotional confrontations had taken their toll. Dr. Rivera found her collapsed in her newly reinstated office one morning. The warning sign she'd been hiding finally impossible to ignore. The experimental treatment we started, he explained gently to Jack. It's extremely expensive. The hospital's insurance is still being sorted out during the transition and the coverage. But she's staff now, Jack protested. Mr. Edwards said. It's more complicated than that. Sweetheart, Sarah interrupted weakly from her hospital bed. The treatment costs more than my annual salary. We can't expect. Jack noticed his mother had been signing papers before he arrived. Mom, what are those? Sarah tried to hide them, but Jack was quicker. His heart sank as he read withdrawal from experimental treatment program and education trust fund transfer. Mom, no, you can't stop treatment. Not now. Jack, listen, Sarah took his hand. Your scholarship to Westbrook. It needs to be secured for the next 6 years. This money will guarantee your future. I don't want a future without you, his voice cracked with desperation. Please, Mom, we'll find another way. I can sell more candy, or... You will do no such thing, Sarah said firmly, though tears streamed down her face. I've watched you sacrifice your childhood once already. Never again. A mother's job is to secure her child's future, and that's what I'm doing. By giving up. By choosing what matters most. Your education, your chances, your dreams, they're worth everything to me. But outside the room, Emily overheard everything. She ran to find her father, but Edward was in emergency board meetings, dealing with the fallout from the Wells investigation. The hospital was hemorrhaging donors, and restructuring was proving more difficult than anticipated. Emily found Jack later in the hospital chapel, clutching his mother's old nursing badge. She's giving up her treatment so I can stay at Westbrook, he said hollowly. After everything, the truth coming out, her name being cleared, she's still sacrificing everything for me. Emily sat beside him. Then we don't let her. There has to be another way. But Sarah had already signed the papers. The trust fund was established, irrevocably transferring her treatment money to Jack's education fund. When Edward finally heard about it, he rushed to her room. This is unnecessary, he insisted. We can find funding, create a special case. No more special cases, Sarah said firmly. That's what got the hospital in trouble before. I won't bend rules even for myself. Mom, Jack pleaded. What about justice? You deserve to live, to have your life back. Sarah smiled at her son. I have my life back. My name is cleared. You're getting an education. The hospital is becoming what Catherine dreamed. Sometimes living isn't about how many days we have, but what we do with them. That evening, the hospital staff who had learned of Sarah's decision gathered outside her room. One by one, they came forward with offers: donated sick days, shared insurance benefits, pooled resources. You sacrificed everything to protect hospital ethics, Dr. Rivera said. Let us help now. But Sarah remained firm. The papers were signed, the decision made. She had chosen her son's future over her own chance at extended treatment. Jack spent that night by her bedside, remembering all the times she'd sacrificed for him, going hungry so he could eat, working multiple jobs so he could study, maintaining dignity when others slandered their name. Now she was doing it again, ensuring his future with her own medicine money. I'm not worth this, he whispered. You're worth everything, she answered, stroking his hair. You always have been. Outside, Emily sat with her father in the hospital garden, asking questions no child should have to ask. Dad, why do moms have to die to protect what's right? Edward had no answer, but the parallel wasn't lost on him. Two mothers, choosing principles over self-preservation, sacrificing everything for their children's futures. The next morning, Jack made a decision of his own. If his mother would sacrifice her treatment for his education, then he would find a way to save them both. He just didn't realize his desperate plan would nearly cost him everything she was fighting to protect. The change in Jack was subtle at first. His perfect attendance at Westbrook began showing gaps. His exemplary grades started slipping. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, though he insisted everything was fine. What no one knew was that Jack had started working nights. Not just one job, but 3 stocking shelves at a local market, cleaning offices, and his old candy sales during any free moment. Every penny went into a hidden fund for his mother's treatment. You look tired, Emily noticed one morning, finding him asleep over his textbooks in the library. Just studying late, he lied, concealing the cleaning chemicals that had burned his hands raw the night before. But Emily wasn't fooled. She'd seen him leaving the market at midnight when her father's car passed by. She'd noticed the candy box hidden in his locker, no longer a memory but back in active use. The breaking point came during an important exam. Jack, running on 2 hours of sleep after a night shift, collapsed at his desk. The school nurse found his temperature dangerously high, his body pushed far beyond its limits. "How long has this been going on?" Dr. Rivera demanded, examining Jack in the emergency room. Jack's backpack had spilled open, revealing everything pay stubs from multiple jobs, a notebook tracking every penny earned, and a brochure for his mother's experimental treatment with prices circled desperately. "I almost have enough," Jack whispered feverishly. "Just 2 more weeks of extra shifts. Please don't tell her." Edward, called to the hospital as Jack's emergency contact, stood in the doorway, heart breaking at the sight. The boy who'd saved his daughter was destroying himself trying to save his mother. "3 jobs," Edward's voice cracked. "You're 12 years old, Jack." "I have to try." Jack's composure finally broke. "Everyone keeps talking about justice and truth, but Mom's still dying. What good is her name being cleared if she's not here to see it?" The truth hit everyone hard. While adults fought over hospital politics and ethics committees debated policies, a 12-year-old boy had been silently working himself to exhaustion, trying to fix what the grown-ups couldn't. Sarah, learning what her son had been doing, tried to leave her hospital bed to reach him. The effort sent her monitors into alarm. "No more," she begged as nurses rushed in. "Please, Jack, no more sacrificing." But Jack was beyond hearing, lost in delirium and exhaustion. For days he drifted in and out of consciousness, his body finally rebelling against months of neglect and overwork. Emily barely left his side, reading him the same books they'd studied together. Through his fever she heard him mumbling about candy prices and cleaning schedules, still trying to calculate how to save his mother. The hospital staff who witnessed this breakdown were profoundly shaken. They'd been so caught up in institutional drama, they'd forgotten about the personal toll on the youngest victims of the scandal. Dr. Rivera, reviewing Jack's case, discovered the boy had been surviving on vending machine food and energy drinks for weeks. His growth was stunted, his immune system compromised. "He has the early signs of malnutrition," Rivera reported grimly. "The same condition we're treating his mother for." The irony was devastating. Both mother and son sacrificing their health for each other, creating a cycle of suffering that neither would survive. When Jack finally regained full consciousness, he found his hospital room filled with evidence of how many people cared. Emily's drawings, cards from classmates, even notes from hospital staff, sharing their own stories of working multiple jobs to save loved ones. But it was the sight of his mother in the next bed, moved there at Edward's insistence, that broke him completely. "I failed," he sobbed as Emily held his hand. "I couldn't save her." "No, sweetheart," Sarah called weakly from her bed. "You've saved me every day since you were born. By being my son, by making me proud, by showing the world what integrity looks like. But you can't save me by destroying yourself." Edward, watching this exchange, made a private vow. These sacrifices: a mother choosing between treatment and her son's education, a child working himself to collapse, trying to save his mother, they would not stand. But before he could act on this resolution, fate had one more cruel twist in store, one that would force everyone to confront the true cost of redemption. The crisis struck at 3 a.m., when the hospital corridors were dimly lit and skeleton staff made their quiet rounds. Sarah's monitors screamed to life, first her vitals plummeting without warning. In the adjacent bed, Jack jolted awake to the nightmare of watching his mother fight for breath. "Code Blue, room 412, the night nurse's voice echoed through the speakers. "Dr. Rivera to room 412 stat." Jack tried to get up, his own weakened body betraying him as he collapsed to the floor. Emily, who had refused to leave despite visiting hours being over, ran for help. "Dad, something's wrong with Mrs. Chen." Edward, who had taken to working late at the hospital since both Chens were admitted, rushed in behind the emergency team. The scene that greeted him would haunt him forever. Sarah Chen gasping for air, while her son crawled desperately toward her bed, both of them reaching for each other even in crisis. "Mom, please," Jack's voice broke. "Don't leave me. Please fight." Dr. Rivera barked orders as the team worked BPs dropping. "Get me the crash cart. Where's that medication?" A cruel echo of the past hit Edward another night. Another code blue, Catherine slipping away while medical teams scrambled. But this time he wasn't frozen by grief. This time he could act. "The experimental treatment," he commanded. "Give it to her now." "Sir, the paperwork." "The transfer." "Damn the paperwork. I'll take full responsibility." "Do it." As the team rushed to administer the treatment, Emily slipped past them to reach Jack, still struggling to stand. Together they watched the desperate battle for Sarah's life unfold. Her heart rate stabilizing, someone called out. Blood pressure coming up. But the victory was short-lived. Sarah's body, weakened by years of deprivation and stress, began rejecting the sudden intervention. Her system, denied the gradual build-up the treatment required, couldn't process the powerful medication. "She's crashing again. Multiple organ response." Jack's own monitors began wailing his heart rate dangerously high as he fought against nurses trying to get him back to bed. The strain of the past months, the current crisis, it was all too much for his depleted body. "We're losing them both," Dr. Rivera's usually steady voice cracked with emotion. But Edward found himself standing between two beds, between two lives hanging by threads, remembering Catherine's last words about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. In that moment of crisis, Eleanor Richards burst into the room. The retired nurse had been volunteering at the hospital since the scandal broke, and now her decades of experience proved crucial. "The old protocol," she shouted to Rivera. "The one Sarah developed for critical cases. It's not in the books, but it worked." Rivera hesitated for a split second, then nodded. "Get me a direct line to the pharmacy. Now." What followed was a masterclass in emergency medicine, with Eleanor reciting Sarah's innovative treatment protocol from memory while Rivera implemented it. The room became a battlefield where every heartbeat was fought for, every breath a victory. Emily held Jack's hand throughout, whispering the same words over and over. "Please stay. Both of you, please stay." Edward found himself praying for the first time since Catherine's death, not to a distant god, but to his late wife. "Help me save them, Catherine. Help me do this one thing right." Hours passed in a blur of medical terminology and beeping monitors. Dawn began breaking over Los Angeles when Dr. Rivera finally stepped back, exhausted but relieved. "They're stabilizing, both of them." The room collectively exhaled. Sarah's eyes fluttered open first, immediately seeking her son. Jack, sedated but stable, was being carefully monitored in his bed. "He's okay," Edward assured her. "You both are, thanks to your own protocol, actually." Sarah managed a weak smile. Catherine always said, "Sometimes the old ways are best." Mum Jack's voice, thick with medication but clear with love, carried across the room. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." Emily, who had remained steadfast throughout the crisis, finally allowed herself to cry. Edward held his daughter, both of them understanding how close they'd come to witnessing another family torn apart. As morning light filtered through the windows, the room settled into a different kind of quiet, not the tense silence of crisis, but the peaceful calm of healing. But amidst the relief, Edward noticed Eleanor Richards' troubled expression. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "The protocol that saved them," she whispered. "Sarah developed it the week before Catherine died. It was supposed to be implemented hospital-wide, but after everything happened." The implication hung heavy in the air. One more piece of the tragic puzzle, one more what if in a story already full of them. As Sarah and Jack drifted into healing sleep, Edward made another silent vow to Catherine. This time, he would make sure every truth was uncovered, every wrong righted no matter the cost. The crisis had passed, but its revelations would force one final, devastating confrontation with the past. Edward stood before the packed hospital auditorium, cameras rolling as he prepared to make the most important speech of his life. The past week's events, Sarah and Jack's near-death experience, Eleanor's revelation about the lost protocol had changed everything. 8 years ago he began, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. I inherited this hospital from my father. 2 years ago I lost my wife within these walls. Today I stand before you not as the owner of Angela's Memorial, but as a man who got everything wrong. The room fell silent. In the front row, Emily sat between Jack and Sarah, both still in wheelchairs but recovering. Amanda Wells sat quietly in the back, her testimony against her father having concluded that morning. My wife Catherine Edwards discovered corruption in our clinical practices. Sarah Chen supported her investigation. Instead of listening to these brave women, I allowed power and pride to bury the truth. Today, that ends. Edward took a deep breath, looking at his daughter who nodded encouragingly. I am stepping down as CEO of Angela's Memorial. Furthermore, I am turning over all documentation of my own complicity in covering up the Wells Foundation's crimes. I could claim ignorance, blame others. I'll protect my reputation. But that's not what Catherine would have wanted. That's not what my daughter deserves to see in her father. Gasps filled the room. Reporters' cameras flashed frantically. The hospital will be restructured as a non-profit organization, overseen by an independent ethics board. Sarah Chen, whose innovative protocols have saved countless lives including her own, will chair that board once she recovers. Sarah looked up in surprise. Edward continued. Every patient affected by the Wells trials will receive full compensation from my personal assets. Every staff member who lost their job for speaking up will be offered reinstatement with back pay, and the Catherine Edwards Memorial Wing will be renamed the Catherine Edwards Chen Center for Medical Ethics, ensuring that both women who fought for truth are remembered. Emily squeezed Jack's hand as tears rolled down her cheeks. But most importantly, Edward's voice cracked slightly. I owe an apology. To my wife's memory, to Sarah Chen and her son, to every patient and family member we failed. I was wrong, we were wrong, and acknowledging that is the first step toward healing. He stepped away from the podium, walked to where Sarah sat, and to everyone's shock, knelt before her. Mrs. Chen, I apologize for destroying your life, for letting pride blind me to truth, for almost costing your son his mother. Can you forgive me? Sarah, tears streaming down her face, took his hands in hers. Catherine forgave you long ago. So do I. The room erupted in emotion, applause, tears, exclamations, but Edward wasn't finished. He turned to Jack. Young man, you taught me more about integrity in one act of saving Emily than I'd learned in a lifetime of running hospitals. Your place at Westbrook is secure, not through your mother's sacrifice, but through a full scholarship program we're establishing for children of healthcare workers. Jack, overwhelmed, could only nod as Emily hugged him. Finally, Edward faced his daughter. Emily, I failed you most of all. I let grief turn me into someone your mother wouldn't recognize, but watching you stand by Jack and Sarah, seeing you fight for truth just like she would have, you've shown me how to be better. I promise, from today forward, to be the father you deserve. Emily ran to her father, wrapping her arms around him as cameras captured the moment, but it wasn't for show, it was real, raw, human truth. As the audience began to disperse, Dr. Rivera approached with urgent news. Sir, the FBI just arrested James Wells trying to flee to Monaco. They found everything offshore accounts, falsified records, years of evidence. But Edward nodded, but his focus remained on the two families before him, his daughter and himself, Jack and Sarah, once divided by tragedy but now united by truth. Justice matters, he said quietly, but this healing, forgiveness, redemption, this matters more. The aftermath of Edward's public confession rippled through Los Angeles like a healing wave. Former patients and families gathered outside Angela's memorial, but not in protest. They brought flowers, cards, and stories, creating an impromptu memorial that stretched along the hospital walls. "Sarah Chen took care of my mother 10 years ago," one elderly man told reporters. "She remembered every patient's name, every detail. That kind of care can't be faked." Local nurses who had quietly supported Sarah during her years of disgrace began speaking out. Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner store revealed how she'd helped Jack sell candy, keeping a portion of her day's earnings to slip into their mailbox. Mr. Chen from the market admitted giving them expired but still good food he couldn't legally sell. "We knew," the neighborhood watch captain said. "We all knew she was innocent, but against the Edwards Wells power, what could we do except help in small ways?" The medical community's response was equally profound. Other hospitals reached out to implement Sarah's patient care protocols. Medical schools requested her participation in ethics curriculum development. Her case became required reading in hospital administration courses. At Westbrook Academy, the transformation was personal. Students who had bullied Jack now approached with awkward apologies. Bradley Wells, dealing with his own family's disgrace, found unexpected comfort in Jack's forgiveness. "How do you do it?" Bradley asked one day. "How do you not hate us all?" Jack's response echoed his mother's wisdom: "Hate takes too much energy. I'd rather use that energy to help people." The hospital staff underwent their own revolution. Those who had remained silent out of fear now spoke freely. Amanda Wells' former nursing team came forward with years of documentation they'd secretly preserved, hoping for this day. Dr. Rivera established a whistleblower protection program named after Catherine Edwards. "Never again," he declared, "will fear silence truth in these halls." Emily's response touched hearts across the city. She organized a children's choir to perform in the hospital gardens every Sunday, continuing her mother's tradition of bringing music to healing spaces. The sight of young voices rising where Catherine once played became a symbol of renewal. But perhaps the most surprising response came from the business community. Instead of abandoning Angela's memorial, major companies pledged support for its new ethical framework. Edward's courage in admitting wrongdoing inspired other CEOs to examine their own practices. "We're not just treating patients anymore," Edward explained to the hospital board. "We're healing a broken system. Catherine and Sarah showed us how." The media narrative shifted from scandal to redemption. Local news ran a special series, Angels of Angela's Memorial, featuring stories of nurses and staff who had quietly maintained their integrity through the dark years. Eleanor Richards' testimony became particularly powerful. Her detailed records of hospital practices before and after Catherine's death revealed a systematic erosion of ethics under Wells' influence. "I watched good people become compromised," she said, "but I also watched a 12-year-old boy choose right over easy, and that gives me hope." Sarah, recovering in the newly renamed Catherine Edwards Chen Center, found her room constantly filled with visitors, former patients, young nurses seeking mentorship, even ethics professors wanting to document her story. "I never wanted to be a symbol," she told Jack as they watched Emily organizing Get Well cards. "I just wanted to be a good nurse." "You're both," Emily declared, "and now everyone knows it." The hospital's transformation became a case study in institutional reform. Other healthcare facilities sent observers to learn from their new ethical frameworks. The Catherine Edwards Chen Center began hosting weekly forums where staff could raise concerns without fear of retaliation. One morning, Edward found Jack and Emily in the hospital garden, teaching younger patients about the constellations using Sarah's old yard sale telescope. "Your mother would be proud," he told his daughter. "Both our mothers would be." Emily smiled, adjusting the telescope for a small cancer patient. "They still are, Dad. They're in every good thing we do now." The community's response had transformed a scandal into a movement, proving that truth, once embraced, could heal more than just bodies. It could heal hearts, institutions, and even the deepest wounds of injustice. The moment of true healing arrived on a quiet Sunday afternoon, 3 months after Edward's public confession. The hospital garden, once Catherine's sanctuary and now a symbol of renewal, hosted a small, private gathering. Sarah Chen, finally strong enough to walk unassisted, stood beside her son as Edward unveiled a new memorial, 2 benches facing each other across a small fountain. One bore Catherine's name and favorite quote about healing through music. The other carried Sarah's nursing credo, "Compassion heals what medicine alone cannot." These benches, Edward explained to the intimate gathering, represent the bridge between 2 families, once divided by tragedy, but united by truth. Emily sat at the garden piano, Catherine's piano, moved from the mansion to create a permanent music corner for patients. Her fingers found the keys of her mother's favorite piece, the same melody that had often drifted through hospital corridors years ago. Jack watched his mother's face as she listened, seeing years of pain melt away in the gentle notes. Here in this garden they were no longer the disgraced nurse and the candy-selling boy. They were simply family, whole and healing. Amanda Wells, invited at Sarah's insistence, stood quietly at the back. Her testimony had helped convict her father, now facing years in prison. Sarah had been the first to offer forgiveness, understanding how fear could trap a young nurse in silence. "Your father's choices weren't yours," Sarah had told her, just as Edward's initial reaction wasn't truly his. Fear and grief make us forget who we are. Dr. Rivera brought a surprise: Catherine's original patient care journal, discovered in old hospital archives. Its pages contained the seeds of many protocols Sarah would later develop, proving how in sync the 2 women had been in their approach to healing. They were both ahead of their time, Rivera observed, seeing patients as people first, cases second. Eleanor Richards presented another gift, a photo from the hospital's holiday party 6 years ago. In it, Catherine and Sarah stood together, smiling as they organized donations for the children's ward. Their shared dedication to patient care was evident in their matching expressions of purpose. "I kept this hidden all these years," Eleanor admitted, afraid to show how close they were, how much they shared the same vision. Emily and Jack sat together on Catherine's bench, their friendship now a bridge between past and present. They had grown through tragedy into something more than victims or symbols. They had become healers in their own right. "Sometimes," Emily said, touching the engraved words on her mother's bench, "I think they knew this would happen. Not the bad parts, but this, all of us together, making things right." Edward watched his daughter, seeing Catherine's wisdom in her eyes. Sarah observed her son, recognizing her own strength in his gentle determination. 2 mothers' legacies, living on through their children's bond. As evening approached, Sarah stood to address the small group. "Catherine once told me that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about building something stronger in the broken places. Look at us now, 2 families, once shattered, now supporting each other. That's real healing." Edward added softly, "and real justice." The garden lights came on as dusk fell, illuminating the benches and the families gathered there. Emily played one final piece, a duet she and Jack had been practicing, their young hands bringing new life to an old melody. In that moment, watching their children create music together, Sarah and Edward understood that true healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about transforming it into a foundation for a better future. The 2 families, once torn apart by tragedy, had found their way back to wholeness, not despite their broken places, but because of how they chose to heal them. 1 year after the events that transformed Angela's memorial, the hospital hosted a graduation ceremony unlike any other. In the same auditorium where Edward had made his confession, Sarah Chen stood at the podium, now fully recovered and radiant in her role as chair of medical ethics. Today, she announced to the packed room, we celebrate not just the completion of our first ethics in healthcare program, but the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. The graduating class included doctors, nurses, and administrators from hospitals across the country, all there to learn from the Angelus Memorial story. Among them sat Amanda Wells, who had chosen to rebuild her career from the ground up, starting with this program. James Wells' trial had concluded the previous month, resulting in a 20-year sentence for medical fraud and conspiracy. But the real victory wasn't in punishment, it was in transformation. Every piece of evidence had revealed new opportunities for reform. Every exposed weakness had led to stronger protocols. Edward, sitting beside Emily in the front row, watched as Sarah presented the Catherine Edwards Medal for Medical Ethics to its first recipient, surprisingly, Eleanor Richards. For 30 years of quiet integrity, Sarah explained, and for teaching us that it's never too late to speak truth. Eleanor, tears streaming down her face, hugged both Sarah and Edward before accepting the medal. Catherine would be so proud of what we've built from the ashes, she whispered. The hospital itself had undergone a complete metamorphosis. The Catherine Edwards Chen Center for Medical Ethics had become a national model for healthcare reform. Hospitals across the country sent their staff to learn from their example. Jack, now 13 and thriving at Westbrook Academy, sat next to Emily, their friendship a living testament to healing across divides. His perfect grades had earned him early acceptance into the hospital's future medical scholars program. Mommy'd announced the night before, "I know what I want to do with my life. I want to be a doctor who helps people like you and Catherine tried to do." Sarah had hugged him, recognizing in his decision the perfect blend of both mothers' legacies, Catherine's passion for systemic change and her own dedication to patient care. The ceremony concluded with a surprise announcement from Edward. Starting next year, the Angelus Memorial Fellowship in Medical Ethics will provide full medical school scholarships to students committed to ethical healthcare reform. Our first recipient, he smiled at his daughter, will be selected by Emily Edwards when she's old enough, carrying on her mother's vision. Emily beamed, already knowing who would be her first choice in 5 years. After the ceremony, the families gathered in Catherine's garden. The 2 benches had become a favorite spot for hospital staff and patients alike, a place where healing transcended medical charts and corporate policies. "We did it," Catherine Edward whispered, touching his wife's bench. "We made it right." Sarah, overhearing, touched his shoulder gently. She always said truth was the best medicine. She just needed us to be brave enough to take it. The children had spread a picnic blanket nearby, sharing stories with younger patients about the hospital's transformation. Their laughter, mixing with the splash of the fountain and the distant sounds of healing, created a symphony Catherine would have loved. Dr. Rivera joined them, carrying news that perfectly captured the day's spirit of resolution. The FDA just approved Sarah's patient care protocols as the new national standard. They're calling it the Edwards-Chen Framework for Ethical Healthcare. The announcement brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. All those years of fighting for what was right were worth every moment. Edward finished. Catherine knew it. You knew it. We just had to catch up. As evening approached, Emily sat at her mother's garden piano, playing the piece that had become the hospital's unofficial anthem. Jack joined her on the bench, their duet filling the garden with hope. Sarah and Edward watched their children, seeing in their harmony the perfect resolution to years of discord. The truth had indeed set them free, but it was love for patients, for justice, for family that had truly healed them all. The sun set on Angelus Memorial, now not just a hospital, but a beacon of what healthcare could be when compassion guided policy and courage protected truth. Catherine's legacy, merged with Sarah's resilience, had created something beautiful from tragedy's ashes. 5 years passed, bringing changes that would have seemed impossible in the darker days. The morning of Jack's high school graduation dawned bright and clear, the Angelus Memorial Garden in full bloom as if celebrating with them. Jack stood at the Westbrook Academy podium as valedictorian, his mother and the Edwards family sitting proudly in the front row. His speech touched hearts across the audience. 5 years ago, I was selling candy on street corners. Today, I stand here because two mothers taught us all about courage. My own mother, Sarah Chen, who never lost her dignity even when the world turned against her, and Catherine Edwards, who gave her life fighting for what was right. Emily, now 13 and already showing her mother's passion for justice, wiped tears as she watched her best friend continue. But this isn't just my story. It's about how truth can transform lives when we're brave enough to embrace it. Next fall, I'll begin pre-med studies as the first recipient of the Catherine Edwards Memorial Scholarship. My dream is to become a doctor who remembers that healing isn't just about medicine, it's about seeing the humanity in every patient. Edward, sitting between his daughter and Sarah, reflected on how far they'd all come. The hospital had become a model of ethical healthcare, with Sarah's leadership transforming institutional culture across the country. After the ceremony, they gathered in Catherine's garden for a private celebration. The two benches, weathered by years but still strong, held special meaning for this occasion. Sarah sat on her bench, remembering the days when such honor seemed impossible. "Jack," she said softly, "Catherine would have loved seeing this day." Emily, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, I think it's time to share our surprise." Edward nodded, pulling out an envelope. "Jack, the hospital board met yesterday. We're creating a new position, Director of Youth Patient Advocacy. The role combines medical training with ensuring young patients have a voice in their care. We'd like you to consider taking this position after medical school." Jack looked at his mother, seeing her eyes shine with pride. "The position," Sarah added, "will be named after Catherine. You'll be carrying both our legacies forward." Amanda Wells, who had rebuilt her life as a patient rights advocate, stepped forward with her own news. The National Medical Ethics Board has approved the Chen Edwards Protocol as mandatory training for all healthcare workers. Your mother's vision is becoming the standard of care everywhere. The celebration continued into evening, with hospital staff past and present dropping by to congratulate Jack. Dr. Rivera, now Chief of Medicine, brought a special gift, Catherine's old stethoscope, preserved all these years. "She would have wanted you to have this," he told Jack. She believed instruments of healing should pass to those who understand their true purpose. As sunset painted the garden in gold, Emily played her mother's piano, no longer the uncertain child seeking connection, but a confident young woman carrying music's healing power forward. The gathering was interrupted by an unexpected visitor, Bradley Wells, James Wells' son, who had struggled to find his path after his father's downfall. "I know I might not be welcome," he said hesitantly, "but Jack helped me understand something important. Healing isn't just for patients, it's for families, for communities, for everyone touched by pain." Sarah, true to her nature, made room for him on her bench. That's exactly what Catherine would have said. Edward watched this scene unfold, his daughter playing Catherine's music, Jack preparing for a future of healing, Sarah's forgiveness still transforming lives, and even a Wells child finding redemption. "We've come full circle," he said quietly to Sarah, "from that terrible night to this moment of new beginnings." As darkness fell, the garden lights illuminated the scene. Two families, once divided by tragedy, now united in purpose. Jack and Emily, their friendship a bridge between past and future, and the spirit of Catherine Edwards living on in every life touched by her courage. Sarah squeezed Edward's hand. "It's not just new beginnings," she said. "It's the continuation of something Catherine and I always believed in, that healing is an endless circle of compassion, passed from heart to heart." The garden filled with soft music and gentle conversation, a testament to how love could transform even the deepest wounds into sources of healing. 10 years to the day after Jack saved Emily's life, Angela's Memorial Hospital hosted a momentous ceremony. Dr. Jack Chen, freshly graduated from medical school, stood in his white coat before a gathered crowd in Catherine's garden. Life has a way of bringing us full circle, he began, looking at his mother Sarah, now a nationally recognized advocate for medical ethics, and Edward Edwards, who had transformed from adversary to second father. 10 years ago on this spot, a little boy selling candy made a choice that would change everything. Emily, elegant at 18 and headed to medical school herself, sat at her mother's piano, the same instrument that had helped heal so many hearts. The garden had grown more beautiful with time, Catherine's roses blooming alongside new plants Sarah had added, creating a perfect blend of both families' legacies. Today, Jack continued, we're not just celebrating my joining Angela's Memorial as its youngest staff physician. We're celebrating the power of truth to heal across generations. He unveiled a new addition to the garden, a small bronze plaque nestled between the two memorial benches. It read, "Two mothers, one legacy. Catherine Edwards, Sarah Chen. Their courage taught us that healing begins with truth, grows through forgiveness, and blooms in love." Edward stepped forward, his hair now grey but his eyes bright with purpose. Catherine once told me that hospitals shouldn't just treat symptoms, they should heal souls. It took losing her, nearly losing Sarah and Jack, and almost destroying ourselves with pride to understand what she meant. Sarah, standing beside her son in her own white coat, having returned to nursing after her name was cleared, added softly, "And it took 2 children to show us how to find our way back to what matters." Emily played a gentle melody, one she and Jack had composed together, blending themes from her mother's favorite pieces with notes that told their own story of friendship and healing. The ceremony concluded with an unexpected moment. Amanda Wells, who had become a respected patient advocate, brought forward Catherine's old journal, preserved all these years. "We found the last entry," she said, her voice trembling. "The one she never finished. I think today is the day to read it." Edward took the journal with shaking hands and read, "Today I saw the future of healing in 2 children, little Emily's gentleness with patience and Sarah's boy Jack helping in the pediatric ward. They remind me that medicine isn't just science, it's the art of seeing humanity in every person who needs help. If something happens to me, let my legacy be this: truth heals, love perseveres, and sometimes the greatest medicines are kindness and courage." But the words trailed off, but their power filled the garden. Emily left the piano to stand beside Jack, their presence completing Catherine's unfinished thought. As twilight settled over Angela's Memorial, the garden glowed with soft lights. Staff members current and retired, patients past and present, gathered to celebrate not just Jack's achievement, but the long journey from darkness to light. Sarah and Edward sat on their respective benches, watching their children, now grown, but still carrying the best of both families' dreams. "Catherine would love this," Edward said softly. "She does love this," Sarah replied, looking at the stars beginning to appear above. "She's in every life we save, every truth we honor, every heart we help heal." The garden filled with music and laughter, stories and tears, as 2 families once broken by tragedy but mended by love celebrated the completion of one journey and the beginning of another. And somewhere, perhaps Catherine Edwards smiled, seeing her final wish fulfilled. Healing had indeed come through truth, persevered through love, and bloomed in the hearts of those she left behind. The end. Doesn't this story deserve your subscription? We believe in the power of storytelling to touch hearts and transform lives, just as Jack and Emily's journey showed us the healing power of truth and love. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share it with your loved ones. We'd also love to hear your thoughts and the lessons you've taken away from this tale of redemption and healing. From the bottom of our hearts, our team extends our deepest gratitude to all our viewers who have supported this channel. Your engagement helps us continue sharing these meaningful stories that remind us of the extraordinary power of human connection and forgiveness. Remember, like Sarah and Catherine taught us, sometimes the greatest healing comes from sharing our stories with others. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family.